Sometimes the people hiding in the shadows are not hiding because they have done something wrong, but because life has convinced them that they do not deserve to be seen. Ethan Blackwood believed he had witnessed every kind of human behavior money could attract. Inside his sprawling estate overlooking the Hudson River, politicians, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and celebrities gathered beneath crystal chandeliers so often that extravagant evenings had become almost ordinary. Every event was planned with flawless precision. Every table was decorated to perfection. Every course was prepared by award-winning chefs. Yet Ethan had long ago learned that the true character of a house revealed itself only after the last guest had gone home. The celebration had ended nearly an hour earlier. Luxury vehicles disappeared one by one through the iron gates, while the remaining staff quietly restored the grand ballroom to its usual elegance. Servers collected untouched bread baskets, polished silverware, and carefully stacked porcelain plates that had barely been touched during conversations worth millions of dollars. Soft piano music still echoed faintly through hidden speakers as the enormous mansion slowly returned to silence. Ethan preferred walking through the kitchens himself after important events. He rarely explained why. Some assumed he inspected efficiency. Others believed he checked security. The truth was much simpler. He trusted what people did when they believed no one important was watching. As he entered the service hallway behind the main kitchen, he noticed one of the chefs suddenly stop walking. The man's eyes narrowed toward the storage area beside a stainless steel serving cart. "Did you hear that?" another employee whispered. A faint scraping sound drifted through the quiet room. One dishwasher carefully stepped closer before pointing toward the shadows behind a row of stacked food trays. "Someone is hiding back there." Two employees slowly approached, expecting perhaps a stray animal or an intruder who had slipped inside during the busy evening. Instead, a tiny figure stepped backward until there was nowhere else to go. She could not have been older than 9. Her curly dark hair framed frightened brown eyes, and her oversized sweater looked several seasons too old. In her small hands, she held a porcelain dinner plate containing slices of roasted chicken, vegetables, and a dinner roll that appeared untouched. The food had clearly come from one of the banquet tables, but showed no sign that anyone had eaten from it. The little girl lowered her head immediately. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so quietly that several people almost failed to hear her. "I was only taking the plate that nobody wanted." One of the assistant chefs frowned. "She has been stealing food." Another employee reached for the plate, but before anyone could move another inch, Ethan calmly raised one hand. The entire kitchen froze. No one questioned the silent gesture. Ethan studied the child for several long seconds. She was not eating quickly the way someone driven only by hunger might. Instead, she had carefully picked around the edges of the food as though trying not to disturb its appearance, almost as if she hoped no one would notice it had ever been touched. Then he saw something that made him pause even longer. Instead of taking another bite for herself, the little girl quietly opened a small plastic lunch container hidden inside her backpack and gently placed half of the untouched chicken inside, wrapping it carefully with a folded napkin before closing the lid. Only then did she lift the dinner roll toward her mouth. Ethan looked at the lunch container, then back at the frightened child. In a calm voice that surprised everyone standing nearby, he asked only one question. "Who are you saving the rest for?" The little girl looked down at the plastic container in her backpack before answering. Her fingers tightened around its worn blue lid, as though protecting something far more valuable than food. "For my mommy," she whispered. The words were so soft that the bustling kitchen seemed to fall completely silent around them. Ethan Blackwood did not respond immediately. Instead, he noticed something almost everyone else had overlooked. The child had carefully placed the larger portion of chicken inside the container, while leaving only the dinner roll and a few vegetables for herself. Even in her hunger, she had chosen to save the best part for someone else. One of the assistant chefs lowered his voice. "Sir, should we call security?" Ethan slowly shook his head. "No." His answer was calm, but final. He crouched until he was at the little girl's eye level. "What is your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Lily Brooks." "How did you get inside this house, Lily?" She glanced nervously toward the hallway leading to the staff entrance. My mommy works here. Several employees exchanged confused looks. Ethan recognized nearly every department supervisor in his household, but he had never seen the little girl before. Did your mother bring you tonight? Lily quickly shook her head. No, sir. She told me to stay home. She lowered her eyes again. I followed her after she left because she said she would be working very late again. Ethan listened without interrupting. She does not know I am here. Her voice carried no defiance, only guilt. I waited outside until people stopped coming in. Then I found the kitchen door when someone was taking out the trash. The explanation was simple enough to believe. During a large event with dozens of vendors, deliveries, and temporary staff moving in and out, a quiet child could easily pass unnoticed. Ethan looked toward the plate in Lily's hands. Why did you wait until everyone left? Lily answered honestly. Because Mommy says we never take anything that belongs to someone else. She gently touched the untouched chicken inside the container. She told me that if food is still being served, it belongs to the guests. But after everybody goes home, I thought maybe the leftovers would only be thrown away. Several members of the kitchen staff looked at one another with growing discomfort. They all knew she was right. At the end of nearly every banquet, trays of untouched food that could not be safely stored were discarded according to health regulations. Lily had not reached for half-eaten scraps. She had carefully chosen food from a plate that had never left the serving station. Ethan studied the little girl again. There was no greed in her expression. No excitement about getting something for free. Only relief that she might finally have enough to share with her mother. Before he could ask another question, hurried footsteps echoed through the service hallway. A woman wearing a simple housekeeping uniform appeared at the kitchen entrance, breathing heavily as her eyes searched the room. The instant she saw Lily standing beside Ethan, every color drained from her face. Lily, she cried softly, rushing forward. She immediately placed herself between her daughter and everyone else, her voice trembling with embarrassment. I am so sorry. I do not know she had followed me. Please, this is my fault. She has done nothing wrong. Ethan looked at the frightened mother, then back at the little girl, still holding the carefully packed lunch container. And for the first time that evening, he realized this story had never been about a child searching for food. It was about a mother who had spent so long protecting her daughter's dignity that neither of them had asked anyone for help. Angela Brooks could barely bring herself to meet Ethan Blackwood's eyes. She wrapped one protective arm around Lily, while the other nervously twisted the edge of her housekeeping apron. Years of quiet discipline had taught her never to become the center of attention. Yet now every employee in the kitchen seemed to be watching. I sincerely apologize, sir, she said, her voice unsteady. Please do not blame my daughter. She only wanted to help me. Ethan remained silent for a moment before asking the question that had been lingering in his mind. Help you with what? Angela hesitated. She clearly searched for an answer that would protect her daughter's dignity as much as her own. Before she could speak, Lily looked up. Mommy always says she is full after work, the little girl explained. But she gives me her dinner when she gets home. Angela gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder. Lily, the child immediately fell quiet, realizing she had shared something her mother had never intended anyone else to know. Ethan noticed the look that passed between them. It was not anger. It was the silent understanding of two people who had spent a long time carrying the same burden together. Is that true? He asked softly. Angela forced a small smile that did not quite reach her tired eyes. Children worry when they see their parents skip meals. I try not to let her worry. Ethan looked at the lunch container still resting inside Lily's backpack. The carefully wrapped chicken, the folded napkin, and the untouched vegetables suddenly carried far more meaning than any expensive meal served that evening. How long have you worked here? He asked. Almost 3 years, sir. And no one knew your daughter sometimes waited for you? Angela quickly shook her head. She has never come before. Tonight was different. School is out for the week, and our neighbor who usually watches her became sick this afternoon. I thought Lily stayed home after I left. She lowered her eyes with visible embarrassment. I never would have allowed this. Ethan studied the woman standing before him. Her uniform was spotless despite the long shift. Her shoes showed signs of years of careful use, but they had been polished before work. Everything about her suggested quiet pride rather than self-pity. One of the senior cooks stepped forward. "Sir, if I may say something." Ethan nodded. "Angela is one of the hardest workers in this house. She is always the first person to help when another department falls behind. She has never once complained. She even stays late without being asked." Another employee added, "She always tells the new staff where supplies are kept and makes sure nobody feels embarrassed for asking questions." Angela looked genuinely uncomfortable hearing people speak about her. She quietly whispered, "Everyone here works hard." Ethan noticed she accepted praise with the same humility she accepted hardship. She did not defend herself. She did not ask for sympathy. She simply wanted the moment to end before anyone thought less of her daughter. As the room settled into another heavy silence, Ethan realized something that unsettled him far more than the sight of a hungry child. A woman who had spent 3 years serving every guest in his home had somehow learned to hide her struggles so completely that even those working beside her every day had never seen the weight she carried after clocking out. And for the first time that evening, Ethan found himself wondering not what Angela had failed to ask for, but what everyone else had failed to notice. No one expected the next words to come from Ethan Blackwood. He looked around the kitchen, where trays of untouched food still covered the stainless steel counters, then back at Angela and Lily. "Set one table," he said calmly. Several employees exchanged puzzled glances. One of the chefs asked carefully, "For whom, sir?" Ethan answered without hesitation, "For them." The room became completely still. For years, Angela had prepared elegant dining rooms for wealthy guests, yet she had never imagined sitting at one of the tables herself. She immediately shook her head. "Sir, that is not necessary. We will leave. I am truly sorry for the trouble tonight." Ethan met her eyes. "This is not charity, Angela. This is dinner." She opened her mouth to protest again, but Lily quietly tugged on her sleeve. The little girl had never seen anyone speak to her mother with such calm respect inside this house. Within minutes, one of the smaller staff dining rooms was prepared. There were no crystal chandeliers or formal place settings, only a clean wooden table beneath warm lights that made the room feel unexpectedly peaceful after the busy evening. Fresh plates replaced the leftovers that had caused so much embarrassment only moments before. A cook prepared warm roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and freshly baked rolls that had never been served to guests. Another employee poured glasses of cold milk for Lily and iced tea for Angela. Throughout the entire process, Angela remained standing. She seemed unable to believe the invitation was genuine. "Please sit," Ethan said. "You have spent all evening making sure everyone else had a meal. Tonight, someone else can serve you." Slowly, almost reluctantly, Angela took her seat. Lily climbed into the chair beside her, carefully placing the blue lunch container on her lap instead of the table. Ethan noticed the gesture immediately. "You do not need that anymore," he said gently. Lily looked at her, mother before answering. "I still want to save some for tomorrow." The simple reply settled heavily over everyone listening. Angela lowered her head, clearly fighting back emotion. "Lily," she whispered, "we are already being shown more kindness than we deserve." Ethan quietly responded, "No one has to earn the right to eat." Those words lingered in the room long after they were spoken. As everyone finally began eating, Ethan paid attention to something that surprised him even more than Lily hiding behind the serving cart. Neither Angela nor her daughter rushed through their meals. They ate slowly, carefully, and with remarkable gratitude, as though every bite deserved appreciation rather than desperation. Lily smiled when she tasted the warm mashed potatoes, then immediately offered one of her dinner rolls to her mother. "You have this one," she said softly. "You worked all day." Angela smiled through moist eyes before gently breaking the roll into 2 equal pieces. "We share everything," she answered. Watching them, Ethan realized he was witnessing a family tradition built not on abundance, but on sacrifice. There was no complaint, no resentment, and no expectation that life owed them anything. Only quiet love expressed through the smallest acts. As the meal came to an end, Lily looked around the room with innocent curiosity before asking a question that no adult there was prepared to answer. If there's always enough food for everyone, why was Mommy always afraid to bring some home? Angela looked at her daughter for several long seconds before quietly reaching across the table and taking Lily's hand. A faint smile appeared on her face, but could not hide the sadness behind her eyes. Because some gifts are only gifts when they're freely offered, she answered softly. If someone has to ask for them, they can begin to feel like a burden. Lily tilted her head, still too young to understand the invisible weight adults often carried. But you never asked. Angela gently brushed a curl away from her daughter's forehead. That is exactly why. Ethan remained silent, absorbing every word. Around the table, the employees who had stayed behind also listened. Without interruption, nobody reached for another bite of food. The conversation itself had become more important than the meal. After a quiet moment, Ethan asked, "Have we ever had a policy that prevented staff from taking untouched food after events?" The executive chef cleared his throat before answering. "Not exactly, sir. We have always followed food safety regulations. Certain items can be packed for donation if arrangements are made in advance, but many employees avoid asking because they do not want to appear unprofessional. Most simply leave everything behind." Ethan looked around the room. Several staff members lowered their eyes, confirming that the chef was telling the truth. No written rule had ever forbidden kindness. Instead, people had allowed unspoken assumptions to become invisible walls. Angela folded her hands neatly on the table. "Everyone here has always treated me fairly," she said. "Please do not think anyone has been cruel. I chose not to ask because there are others who have difficulties too. I have a job that I am grateful for. That is already more than many people have." Her words carried no bitterness. She spoke with quiet sincerity, as though gratitude had become part of her daily routine despite the challenges she faced. Ethan found that harder to understand than anger would have been. He had met people with every imaginable advantage who still complained about the smallest inconvenience. Yet this woman worked long hours, raised her daughter alone, and somehow still measured her life by what she had instead of what she lacked. Lily looked up at her mother with complete admiration. "Mommy always says we should never let hard days make our hearts smaller." Angela smiled with gentle embarrassment. "I also tell you that little pitchers have big ears." Lily giggled softly, and for the first time that evening the room relaxed. Even a few employees smiled. Ethan noticed how quickly Angela transformed the atmosphere around her. Without realizing it, she made people feel comfortable simply by remaining kind. As dinner ended, one of the cooks quietly packed several fresh meals into insulated containers and placed them on the counter. Before Angela could politely refuse, Ethan spoke. "Those meals were prepared tonight. They are safe, fresh, and they would otherwise go unused. Please take them home." Angela looked at the containers, then at Lily, whose hopeful expression said everything she was too polite to say aloud. After a long pause, Angela nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not because we expected anything, but because tonight my daughter learned that accepting kindness does not diminish a person's dignity." Ethan watched Lily carefully place the containers beside her backpack instead of hiding them inside it, and he realized that one quiet evening had already changed something much deeper than hunger. Yet as Angela and Lily prepared to leave, a question continued to linger in his mind. If a woman with this much integrity had remained almost invisible for 3 years inside his own home, how many other stories have been quietly waiting for someone to finally notice them? The mansion was unusually quiet after Angela and Lily walked through the front gate, carrying the insulated meal containers. Ethan Blackwood remained standing near the dining room window, watching the two figures disappear beyond the stone driveway until they were no longer visible beneath the streetlights. Long after the staff had finished cleaning, he found himself unable to return to his office. Instead, he walked slowly through the empty halls, noticing details he had ignored for years. Every polished floor, every carefully arranged bouquet, every spotless window reflected countless hours of work performed by people whose names many guests would never remember. For the first time, those invisible efforts felt deeply personal. Early the next morning, Ethan arrived at the estate before sunrise, something that surprised even his executive assistant. Instead of heading to the conference room where financial reports waited, he quietly entered the employee entrance. The smell of fresh coffee filled the break room as the first members of the housekeeping team prepared for another busy day. Conversations immediately stopped when they saw him. Ethan greeted them with a simple good morning before asking one unexpected question. How many of you have skipped a meal because you did not want anyone to know you were struggling? No one answered. Several employees exchanged uncertain glances while others lowered their eyes. The silence itself became the answer. Ethan did not press further. He simply thanked everyone for their honesty and continued toward the operations office. There he requested employment records, benefit policies, and staff support programs dating back several years. His operations manager, Daniel Foster, looked confused. Is there a problem, sir? Ethan slowly closed one of the folders. There is something missing. Daniel reviewed the paperwork. Everything appears to be in compliance. Ethan nodded. That is exactly the problem. We have policies that satisfy regulations, but not enough that reflect compassion. Over the next several hours, Ethan quietly spoke with department supervisors, cooks, gardeners, drivers, and maintenance workers. Again and again, he heard similar stories. No one complained about unfair treatment. Instead, they described a workplace where people took pride in solving their own problems without asking for help. Pride had become both their greatest strength and their greatest obstacle. During one conversation, the executive chef admitted, Angela has turned down extra portions more times than I can count. I assumed she simply was not hungry. Another supervisor added, she is usually the one encouraging everyone else. I honestly believe she was doing well. Ethan realized that kindness had surrounded Angela all along, yet assumptions had kept anyone from seeing the truth. That afternoon, he reviewed security footage from previous weeks, not because he suspected wrongdoing, but because he wanted to understand what he had missed. He watched Angela arrive before dawn carrying a worn canvas bag, greet every employee with the same warm smile, and quietly help others before beginning her own assignments. During lunch breaks, she often chose the smallest meal available and spent part of her break calling Lily to make sure she had finished her homework. She never wasted a minute, never sought attention, and never allowed personal hardship to interfere. With the dignity she showed everyone around her. Ethan leaned back in his chair as the final recording ended. The evidence revealed nothing dramatic, only hundreds of ordinary moments that together painted the portrait of an extraordinary woman. He finally understood that true character rarely announced itself with grand gestures. More often, it revealed itself through quiet choices repeated day after day when nobody believed they were being noticed. And Ethan silently made a promise to himself that the invisible people who kept his world running would never remain invisible again. 3 days later, every department supervisor received an invitation to a staff meeting unlike any they had attended before. The gathering was not scheduled in the executive conference room, where financial reports and performance charts usually filled the agenda. Instead, Ethan Blackwood chose the employee dining hall, the same room where Angela and Lily had shared dinner only a few nights earlier. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, fresh coffee filled the air, and employees quietly wondered why the owner himself had asked everyone to attend before the morning shift began. Angela arrived early as always. She greeted coworkers with her usual warm smile and immediately offered to help arrange pastries on the serving table until another supervisor gently reminded her that she was a guest this morning, not part of the setup crew. She looked surprised but thanked him with the same quiet grace she showed everyone. When Ethan entered the room, conversations faded into complete silence. He stood at the front without notes or prepared remarks, taking a moment to look around at the people who kept his estate running every single day. Gardeners, cooks, drivers, housekeepers, maintenance technicians, security officers, and administrative assistants all waited patiently. Ethan finally spoke. This house has always been known for excellence. Guests compliment the meals, the service, and the appearance of every room. They often thank me for those things. He paused before continuing. The truth is that none of those compliments belong to me alone. His eyes slowly moved across the room until they rested briefly on Angela, who immediately lowered her gaze, hoping not to draw attention to herself. Excellence is created by people whose names are rarely spoken outside these walls. That changes today. Several employees looked at one another with quiet curiosity. Ethan continued, "Over the past few days, I have realized that we have built a workplace where asking for help sometimes feels harder than carrying the burden alone. Nobody created that culture intentionally, but intention does not erase responsibility." The room remained perfectly still. Beginning today, every untouched meal prepared after approved events will be safely packaged according to health regulations and made available to employees through a voluntary program. No one will need to explain why they accept it, and no one will ever be judged for doing so. A ripple of surprise spread across the room. Some employees smiled softly while others looked down, visibly emotional. Ethan was not finished. "We are also expanding emergency family assistance, educational support for employees' children, and confidential resources for anyone facing temporary hardship. Dignity should never depend on whether someone feels comfortable asking for help." He deliberately avoided mentioning Angela or Lily by name. He understood that honoring someone's dignity sometimes meant protecting their privacy. Yet many people in the room quietly understood what had inspired these changes. After the meeting ended, employees slowly gathered around the coffee station, speaking with an optimism that had not been there before. Angela remained near the doorway, waiting until most people had left before approaching Ethan. "Sir," she said softly, "I hope you know I never wanted any special treatment." Ethan smiled gently. "You did not receive special treatment, Angela. You reminded me what fair treatment should have looked like all along." For the first time since they had met, Angela allowed herself to believe those words. She thanked him with quiet sincerity before returning to her work, unaware that the greatest change had already happened. The people around her no longer saw only the woman who cleaned the hallways. They finally saw the strength, humility, and quiet courage that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. Autumn slowly settled over the Hudson Valley, painting the trees surrounding the Blackwood estate in shades of amber and crimson. Life inside the mansion continued with its familiar rhythm, yet something had quietly changed beneath the polished routines. Employees no longer hurried past one another with polite distance. Conversations in the break room lasted a little longer. Fresh meal containers rested neatly inside a refrigerator marked simply, "For anyone who needs one," and every evening a few would disappear without questions, without paperwork, and without embarrassment. Ethan Blackwood noticed that nobody abused the privilege. In fact, many employees who could easily afford groceries occasionally placed homemade casseroles, fresh fruit, or baked bread inside the same refrigerator for others to enjoy. Kindness, once given permission to exist openly, had begun multiplying on its own. Angela continued arriving before sunrise every morning. She still greeted everyone with the same warm smile and completed every task with quiet excellence. If anything had changed about her, it was almost impossible to see from the outside. She had never worked for recognition, and she had no intention of starting now. Yet Ethan observed one small difference that meant more than any promotion or award. The tiredness that had once lingered behind her eyes was slowly fading. One Friday afternoon, Ethan happened to walk through the staff entrance just as school buses were finishing their neighborhood routes. He glanced through the front windows and smiled when he recognized Lily sitting on a bench beneath a large maple tree outside the estate. Instead of hiding behind the building, she was reading a library book while patiently waiting for her mother to finish work. A security officer walked past and offered her a bottle of water. She thanked him with the same manners Angela had clearly taught her. A gardener waved while trimming flower beds, and Lily happily waved back. Nobody looked at her with suspicion anymore. She had become a familiar face, welcomed, instead of hidden. Ethan stepped outside and walked toward the bench. "That looks like an interesting book," he said. Lily carefully held up the cover. "It is about a girl who wants to become a scientist." Ethan smiled. "What do you want to become someday?" She thought for a moment before answering. I'm not sure yet. Mommy says I should choose something that helps people, because if you help enough people, you will always have a purpose. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Your mother gives very good advice. Lily smiled proudly. She always does. A few minutes later, Angela emerged from the staff entrance carrying her canvas bag. When she saw Ethan talking with Lily, she immediately apologized for keeping her daughter waiting on the property. Ethan gently interrupted her. There is nothing to apologize for. He reached into his briefcase and handed Angela a neatly sealed envelope. She looked at it with uncertainty. What is this, sir? Please read it at home. That evening, after Lily had finished her homework at the small kitchen table in their apartment, Angela carefully opened the envelope. Inside was not a check, a gift card, or a personal donation. It was an official letter announcing a new scholarship established by the Blackwood Family Foundation for the children of estate employees, covering school supplies, educational programs, and future college assistance based entirely on academic effort and personal character. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note from Ethan that simply read, "No child should ever have to hide in order to dream." Nearly 1 year later, the Blackwood estate hosted its annual holiday gathering for every employee and their families, a tradition that had quietly taken on new meaning. The grand ballroom still sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, elegant decorations still lined the marble halls, and music still floated gently through the air, but this celebration no longer belonged only to distinguished guests. It belonged to the people whose dedication had filled the house with life every day of the year. Children laughed as they admired the towering Christmas tree. Parents shared meals without rushing back to work, and co-workers who once knew little about one another now greeted each other like extended family. Ethan Blackwood stood near the entrance, welcoming every employee personally. When Angela Brooks entered the ballroom holding Lily's hand, conversations naturally paused, not because anyone wished to stare, but because so many people smiled when they saw them. Angela looked exactly as she always had, carrying herself with quiet dignity and wearing a simple navy blue dress that reflected her modest nature rather than drawing attention. Lily, however, seemed different. The timid little girl who had once hidden behind a serving cart now walked confidently beside her mother, her eyes bright with excitement instead of uncertainty. As they approached, Ethan knelt slightly to greet her. I heard someone earn excellent grades this semester, he said with a warm smile. Lily beamed proudly. I made the honor roll. Your teachers also wrote that you help other students after class. She nodded. Mommy says learning means more when you share it. Ethan glanced toward Angela, who smiled with quiet humility. She teaches me that every day, he replied. During dinner, something remarkable happened without anyone announcing it. Employees naturally invited Angela and Lily to sit at one of the central tables instead of quietly choosing seats along the edges of the room. Plates filled with fresh food were passed around the table. Laughter replaced awkward silence, and nobody thought twice about whether they belonged there. At one point, Lily looked across the room toward the kitchen entrance where she had once hidden in fear. She gently squeezed her mother's hand and whispered, I'm glad I do not have to hide anymore. Angela kissed the top of her daughter's head before answering, You never belonged in the shadows, sweetheart. Sometimes it just takes the right people a little longer to notice the light. Ethan happened to overhear those words. He looked around the ballroom and realized that the greatest transformation had not been the scholarship program, the meal initiative, or the new employee support policies. The greatest change was something that could not be measured on any financial report. People now saw one another before they saw job titles, uniforms, or circumstances. As the evening came to a close, Ethan stepped onto the small stage to thank everyone for another successful year. His speech was brief. Buildings are constructed with stone and steel, he said. Homes are built by people who care for one another. Thank you for reminding me of that truth. The room answered with heartfelt applause, but Angela noticed Ethan was not looking toward the crowd. His eyes rested for just a moment on Lily, who smiled back with the quiet confidence of a child who finally believed she belonged. That simple exchange said more than any speech ever could. One forgotten dinner plate had become the beginning of a new tradition, One frightened little girl had changed the culture of an entire household, and one mother's unwavering dignity had reminded everyone that compassion is never measured by how much a person has, but by how faithfully they protect the dignity of others. In that day, everyone in the room remembered what dignity truly looks like.